So I'm just going to talk about how we mitigate the challenges that are going to face us over the next few months, thinking about what we've learned from this situation already. And I think for me, one of the key places I always go to for help and advice is the Education Endowment Foundation. So their recent guidance report is on supporting school planning 2020 to 21. And has got these 3 key questions in it for us to think about. So how will remote learning provision be provided? That is our key priority at the moment, isn't it, in contingency planning? But also thinking about aspects of remote learning and how we can integrate them into school policies. So not just thinking about remote learning and online learning as part of your safeguarding policy, but how it now needs to be built into your homework policy, your feedback policy, any teaching and learning strategies that you've got. And when you consider what you did over lockdown and what you want to do now, how well do your school practices actually align with what the evidence shows makes good remote learning, so that we're not going down some rabbit hole of things that people have told us on Twitter. We're actually looking at what the evidence shows will make really effective learning in any kind of lockdown scenario or local lockdown scenario. So I wanted us to just think about what we know from experience over the last few months about pupils, parents and teachers. We know that transitioning to online learning at scale is incredibly difficult and very complex, and there were profound equity concerns that the last 2 presentations have just touched on as well. We know from pupils that most online learners experience some kind of difficulty, whether that's access to devices, access to Wi-Fi, or just their home environment or their own motivation to learn. So every pupil will have had some kind of difficulty. We know that highly motivated learners will make the most out of online learning. We know that the best learners in an offline context tend to perform better in an online context than their peers. And we know that online learning for younger pupils is much more challenging. We know that parents and carers are a critical piece of this puzzle, particularly for younger learners. And we know that parents' literacy skills, their numeracy skills, their own digital literacy skills, their home working environment, their motivation are all an issue. And we know from teachers that some found it very difficult to transition quickly and effectively to online learning. We know that they needed very quick training and support and are going to continue to need that training and support. We know that some pedagogical practices don't translate easily to online learning. Some practical subjects found it very difficult initially. We also know that we had some champions, some really highly capable teachers that ran with this and supported other teachers, and they ran a lot of the training for us. And we know that infrastructure for teachers is very important too. So thinking about that, what do we need to think about then in terms of mitigating for any uncertainty in the future? And for me, it's about structure, skills and support for all of those different groups of people that I've mentioned. So my advice would be, in terms of structure, that you need to have a plan now to get through an initial start to distance learning if it happens again. If we go into some kind of local lockdown, where I appreciate it's more likely that primary schools are not going to have to go into a full shutdown, but secondary schools might, and might only end up with the children of key workers again. Have you got a plan in place that if that was said that on Monday we go into a lockdown again, what is it that you've got to communicate to your staff, your pupils and your parents very quickly? Get that plan in place now. Ensure that there's a unified approach in the schools, that the procedures and the principles are shared to everybody. Think about incorporating a blended learning approach. And again, this has been touched on the last 2 presentations, but how you can incorporate blended learning and the tools into pedagogical practice now. Think about what's accessible, what's fit for purpose, ways to bring about connectivity for students, and use your EdTech competent staff in any planning and implementation decisions, even if they are early career teachers. As SLT, you should be getting them in and asking them, what is it that works? What can we do better? How can we communicate this? Because they might have much more knowledge than SLT, than faculty leaders. Get them in and ask them their opinions. Use the EEF materials and build faculty strength around pedagogical models. Get your faculties to think about what makes good online learning in their subject. In terms of the skills, we need to be doing distance learning activities in some kind of form with pupils now. So I think the danger at the moment is we come back and we think we're in the classroom with them, we need to be teaching them in the same kind of way, setting the same kind of homework. Think about using Microsoft Teams, Google Classrooms, all the tools that you've been using in lockdown, using those for homework activities so that those students are learning those skills, and we can help the parents with those skills as well. It gives them that continuity that they're going to need. So think about the skills that they're going to need to actually access the material. So how they get on Google Classroom, how they get on Teams, how they get on G Suite, anything like that. But also build into lessons explicit teaching of metacognitive knowledge and self-regulation. For me, those skills are the most important. The pupils that were able to regulate their own learning were the pupils that coped much better with remote learning. And incorporate explicit teaching of generative learning activities, but model how to do this to pupils. So it's something that you'll be doing already, how to mind map, how to be imaginative, how to take notes, how to summarize, but make those skills explicit to pupils and make them reflect on how they're using those skills, so that if we go into some kind of blended learning scenario and remote learning scenario again, that pupils have got those skills to draw on, and we can carry on teaching them new material rather than the default over lockdown for a lot of schools, which was to do a lot of recap and a lot of retrieval practice. We can teach them new things. We can use generative learning and metacognitive strategies to help them with their new learning, because they'll have those skills. And then in terms of the support, find out what's working for staff, for students and for parents, and pivot when you need to. There's no one size fits all of this. You need to use your professional judgment on a lot of it, but parents need the guidance and support now in order to help in any kind of mitigate any uncertainty going on in the future. Find efficiencies. Don't be pre-recording lessons or doing live lessons as if there is already an alternative out there. You know, GCSE Pod, the kind of White Rose Maths, all of those kinds of things. We need to be using the expert materials that are already out there to reduce the workload of staff, I think. And that is a way of helping to support our staff. So my final bits of advice would be, make sure there's a one-stop shop for access to learning opportunities. So don't have some things on the website, some things going out by email, some on text. Have one area where everything is held so that it's much easier for people to find things. Provide low bandwidth and offline solutions where you need to, as you did over lockdown. Do your best with what you know you can do. Don't reinvent the wheel. Keep it simple. Less is more. Trust your professional judgment, get feedback, but when you get that feedback, manage the expectations of parents. Make it very clear to them what you are going to do in any kind of tiered approach to lockdown learning. Manage their expectations so they don't have that unrealistic expectation that you're going to do live lessons constantly. And balance stability with experimentation. Staff have got a lot of skills that they need to learn. Don't run too much with things that are going to frighten them. Get the basics in place, get that stability before you start then trying to experiment and be a bit more creative with your online learning.